It was a cold Texas evening when dark clouds gathered over the open fields. The sky had turned gray and the wind carried the smell of rain and dust. Luke rode his horse, a strong brown stallion named Dusty, across the ranch land. He had worked there all his life. He knew every fence post, every trail, and every lonely corner of that land. Since the day his wife passed away, Luke had lived mostly in silence. He spoke little, worked hard, and kept to himself. The ranch had become his only companion. That night he was searching for a few lost cattle before the storm grew stronger. The rain started falling fast and thunder rolled through the hills. As lightning flashed, he saw something strange ahead. A small car stuck halfway in the mud, its headlights dim through the rain. The engine was dead and the front wheels had sunk deep. He guided his horse closer and saw a young woman inside, her hands shaking as she tried to start the car again. Luke stopped a few feet away and called out in a deep, calm voice. "You all right, ma'am?" The woman jumped in fear at first. She looked out and saw a man in a wide hat, soaked in rain, sitting tall on a horse. His voice carried steady strength. "My car. It just died," she said, her voice breaking. "I think I took a wrong turn. I'm not from here." He nodded and got off his horse, stepping into the mud. "Stay calm," he said softly. "We'll get you out of this." His tone was simple but full of care. He tied the horse near a fence post and walked around the car to see how bad it was. "You can't drive out of this tonight. Roads flooded past the bend." She looked scared, holding her coat tight. "What should I do?" "There's no signal here." Luke thought for a second, then said, "You can stay at my ranch until the storm passes. It's not far." She hesitated, unsure if she should trust him, but when she looked into his face, there was no danger, just a tired man with honest eyes. She nodded slowly. He helped her grab her bag and she climbed up behind him on the horse. She held onto his coat tightly. The rain made the world blur around them. The horse started to move fast, leaping through the muddy road. She gasped and cried, "Be gentle. It's too fast." Luke slowed down at once and smiled faintly. "Don't worry, ma'am," he said over the rain. "Dusty's strong, but he listens." He kept the pace slow and steady. Her hands relaxed slightly, still trembling. They rode through the storm for miles. Luke felt her shiver behind him, so he pulled his coat back to shield her from the wind. The ranch house came into view, a small wooden place with light glowing softly through the window. When they reached it, Luke helped her down carefully. Inside, the room was warm and smelled of firewood. A golden retriever came running and barked happily, wagging its tail. The woman smiled for the first time that night. "He's friendly," she said. Luke nodded. "That's Rusty. He doesn't bite unless you're a raccoon." She laughed a little, which made Luke's eyes soften. He handed her a towel and pointed to the fireplace. "Sit close to the fire. I'll get you some coffee." She sat there watching him move around the kitchen, quiet, confident, calm. His every action was slow and sure, like someone used to living alone but still kind enough to care. She noticed the photos hanging on the wall, a younger Luke smiling beside a woman with bright eyes, both standing under a summer sky. The frames looked old and a bit dusty. When Luke came back with 2 cups of coffee, she said, "I'm sorry if I'm troubling you." "I didn't mean to get lost." He shook his head. "No trouble at all. The storm catches everyone off guard sometimes." She looked at him closely. "You live here alone?" He nodded. "Been that way for a while." There was something in his tone that told her not to push further, but she couldn't help asking. "Your wife?" He took a slow breath, then said softly, "She passed away, years back." Silence filled the room for a moment, broken only by the sound of rain outside. The woman lowered her eyes, feeling sorry for bringing it up. But Luke didn't seem angry, just quiet, like a man who had made peace with sorrow but still carried it everywhere. "What about you?" he asked gently. She hesitated before answering. "My name's Emma. I just moved here for a job in town. Thought a small drive through the countryside would help me clear my mind. I guess I didn't think about the weather." He nodded again. "You picked the wrong night for sightseeing." She smiled shyly. "Seems that way." They both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes after fear has passed. Emma felt warmth return to her heart. There was something safe about Luke's quiet presence. He didn't ask too many questions, didn't pry. He just made sure she was comfortable. As the night went on, the storm outside grew stronger. Lightning flashed, followed by heavy thunder that shook the walls. The power flickered for a moment, then steadied again. Luke placed more wood in the fire. "You can rest in the guest room," he said. "It's clean and the bed's warm." Emma nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me." Luke simply replied, "No one deserves to be out in weather like this." Before she went to bed, she stopped by the doorway and looked at him. He was sitting near the fire, his hat on his knee, staring quietly into the flames. For the first time, she noticed how gentle his eyes were, even though his face looked strong and worn from years of hard work. That night, Emma couldn't sleep easily. The sound of the storm mixed with thoughts running through her mind. The stranger who rescued her, the way he moved with calmness, and the sadness that lingered behind his quiet words. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: trust. Downstairs, Luke stayed by the fire a while longer. Rusty lay by his feet, and the horse outside neighed softly in the rain. Luke thought about how unexpected life could be. He had ridden out that evening thinking only of lost cattle, yet somehow found a soul just as lost as he was. As midnight passed, the storm began to calm. Luke finally blew out the lamp and looked once toward the guest room door. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, the house didn't feel so empty. The rain stopped just before dawn, leaving a soft mist over the fields. The silence after the storm felt peaceful, almost healing. In that quiet hour, Luke realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes life doesn't ask permission before sending someone new your way. Sometimes, even in the middle of the hardest storm, you're not rescuing someone else, you're being rescued too. The morning light crept softly through the curtains as Emma slowly opened her eyes. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, and the sound of footsteps echoed faintly across the wooden floor. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw the cowboy hat hanging on the wall and the small dog sleeping near the door. And everything came back to her: the storm, the muddy road, and the quiet man who had rescued her in the rain. She got out of bed, still wearing the oversized shirt Luke had given her the night before. The floor was warm from the fire still glowing in the fireplace. When she walked into the kitchen, Luke was already there, pouring coffee into 2 old mugs. He looked the same as last night, steady, calm, and quiet, as if the world outside couldn't touch him. "Morning," he said, his voice deep and slow. "Good morning," she replied softly, brushing her hair back. "You were up early?" "Ranch doesn't wait for anyone," he said with a faint smile. "Cattle still need feeding even after a storm." He handed her a cup and she sat down by the wooden table. The warmth of the drink eased her. Through the window she saw the sun rising over the fields, shining on wet grass and puddles that sparkled like glass. Everything looked peaceful after the long night. "Your car's still stuck," Luke said as he sat down across from her. "Road's too muddy. We'll need to wait for it to dry out a bit." Emma nodded. "I understand. I don't mind staying for a while if that's okay." He looked up from his cup. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." There was silence for a few seconds, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Emma studied the lines on his face. They told stories of wind, sun, and time. She could tell he was a man who had known both love and loss. After breakfast, Luke went out to the barn and Emma followed. She wanted to help. The rain had left mud everywhere and the smell of earth filled the air. Luke opened the barn doors and the horses neighed softly. "You don't have to work," he said when he saw her. "I want to," she said simply. "I don't like sitting still." He smiled again, just a little. "All right then. You can hand me the hay bales." They worked side by side. Emma struggled at first. The bales were heavier than she expected. Luke noticed and quietly took half her load without a word. He didn't make her feel weak. He just made it easier. The quiet between them felt natural. Every now and then she would glance at him, wondering what it would be like to live such a steady, simple life. When they finished, Luke led one of the horses out to the pasture. "This one's Daisy," he said. "She doesn't like strangers much, but she'll get used to you." Emma gently reached out and stroked the horse's mane. "She's beautiful," she said. The horse leaned closer to her hand and Luke nodded approvingly. "Guess she trusts you already." They walked back toward the house. Luke stopped by the porch and looked out over the valley. "When the rain stops like this," he said quietly, "everything feels new again." Emma followed his gaze. The world around them shimmered under the sunlight. "It does," she said softly, like the earth just took a deep breath. That afternoon, Luke fixed a loose board on the porch while Emma cleaned the kitchen. She found herself humming softly, something she hadn't done in a long time. It surprised her how peaceful she felt here. Every moment in the city had always felt rushed, noisy, and full of pressure. But here, time moved slower. Even the silence had warmth. Later, Luke came inside with 2 sandwiches and placed one in front of her. "Hope you don't mind simple food," he said. She smiled. "It's perfect." They ate quietly, and she noticed how carefully he chewed, how he never rushed. He was a man who respected small things, a clean table, a full plate, a quiet moment. After lunch, she looked around the living room again. The photographs on the wall drew her attention. There was Luke with a woman beside him, both young and full of life. In another, they stood beside a newborn foal. The woman's smile was bright, and Emma felt something ache in her chest. Luke noticed her looking but didn't stop her. "Her name was Sarah," he said quietly. "We were married 12 years. She loved this place even more than I did." Emma turned to him, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "She got sick one winter. Doctors couldn't help much out here." There was a deep stillness in his tone, not bitterness, just memory. Emma didn't try to comfort him with words. Instead, she said softly, "She must have been lucky to have you." Luke looked surprised but didn't reply. He turned back toward the window, the golden light falling across his face. In the evening, they sat by the fire again. Rusty lay between them, snoring softly. Emma told him more about her life in the city, her stressful job, her noisy apartment, her feeling of being lost, despite having everything she thought she wanted. Luke listened carefully, never interrupting. "When I drove out here yesterday," she said, "I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe I just wanted to breathe again." Luke nodded. "The land has a way of teaching you to slow down." She looked at him and smiled. "I think you do too." He chuckled softly. "I'm just an old cowboy who doesn't talk much." "Maybe that's exactly what people need sometimes," she said gently. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. The fire crackled. For the first time in years, Luke felt a calm he hadn't known since Sarah's passing. Emma's presence filled the space that had been empty for so long. There was no rush, no noise, just 2 people sharing quiet moments that spoke louder than words. When it was time to rest, Emma stood and thanked him again. "You've been so kind," she said. "You didn't even know me." Luke looked up at her with a soft expression. "Sometimes kindness doesn't need a reason." That night, Emma sat awake for a while, looking out the window. The moonlight covered the fields in silver. She thought about her life, her choices, and the strange turn that had brought her here. Maybe fate didn't always come with signs. Sometimes it came as a quiet stranger in a storm. Downstairs, Luke checked the barn one last time, making sure everything was in place. He paused at the gate and looked toward the road. The storm had left everything shining and new. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. There was laughter in his house again, light footsteps on his porch, and a voice that made the silence easier to bear. When he walked back in, he saw the empty coffee cups on the table and the blanket Emma had folded neatly before bed. It was a small thing, but it touched him deeply. He whispered to himself, "Maybe some storms don't come to destroy. Maybe they come to bring someone home." He blew out the lamp and sat by the window, watching the moon climb higher. The wind carried the scent of fresh grass, and somewhere out there a coyote howled. Luke smiled faintly. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, it felt enough just to be alive and not alone. And in that peaceful silence, both of them, under the same roof, under the same sky, felt something new taking root. It wasn't love yet. It was something simpler, softer, but strong enough to change the rhythm of 2 hearts that had been wandering for far too long. The morning sun climbed high over the ranch, and the air smelled fresh after 2 long days of rain. The puddles across the dirt road glimmered like small mirrors, and the horses in the paddock shook their manes, enjoying the clear sky. Emma stood by the porch, watching everything come alive again. Luke had already been out since dawn, fixing fences and checking the land. He moved like a man who had spent his whole life here, steady, careful, with a sense of quiet purpose that made even simple work seem meaningful. When he came back toward the house, his boots were covered in mud, but his eyes looked peaceful. "Roads are drying up," he said. "You'll be able to get to town by afternoon. If you'd like, I can take you there myself." Emma looked at him, part of her glad to hear it, part of her strangely sad. She nodded softly. "Thank you. I don't want to trouble you again." He smiled faintly. "It's no trouble." After breakfast, Luke saddled his horse and Emma packed her small bag. The car was still stuck in mud, so the only way back to town was on horseback. When she stepped outside, the horse stood ready, his coat shining under the morning sun. She hesitated, holding the saddle strap nervously. "You ever ridden one before?" Luke asked gently. "Not really," she admitted. "Then we'll go slow," he said. "Just trust me, all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. He helped her up and climbed on behind her, steadying her with a hand on her arm. The horse shifted beneath them, and she gasped softly as they started moving. "Be gentle," she whispered, almost the same words she had said that night in the storm. "It's too fast," Luke chuckled. "Don't worry. Dusty knows when to take it easy." The horse slowed to a calm rhythm, its hooves pressing softly into the dirt road. The air was clean and cool. Birds sang from the trees, and far in the distance mountains stood sharp and blue. Emma slowly relaxed, feeling the rhythm of the ride blend with the sound of the wind. After a while, Luke spoke quietly. "You seem different from most city folks. They come out here looking for excitement. You just seem to want peace." She smiled faintly. "I think I've had enough excitement in my life." "Peace sounds better." He nodded, understanding. "Peace doesn't come easy. You gotta learn to sit still long enough to notice it." They rode through open meadows filled with wildflowers. The scent of rain still hung in the air, and streams of sunlight broke through the clouds. Every few minutes, Luke would point out something small. A hawk circling above. A herd of deer running along the ridge, the way the grass bent when the wind passed through. Emma found herself listening more than talking. She realized he noticed beauty in things most people ignored. Maybe that was what made him different. As they neared the edge of town, Emma began to recognize buildings in the distance. A gas station, a diner, a small post office. Her heart sank a little. The closer they got, the more she realized how quiet her soul had been at the ranch and how noisy it would be again once she left. They stopped by a small diner where a few locals sat outside. Luke helped her down from the horse. One old man in a hat waved from the porch. "Luke, haven't seen you in weeks. Storm treat you all right?" Luke nodded. "Did fine, Sam. Found this lady stuck out by the creek." The man chuckled. "You always find folks in trouble, don't you? Just like the old days." Emma smiled politely as Sam looked at her kindly. "You must have had quite a night, dear," he said. "I did," she replied. "But I couldn't have met a better rescuer." Luke lowered his head a little, shy from the attention. Sam laughed. "That man saved more people than he admits. Once walked 10 miles in a snowstorm to bring a lost boy home." Emma turned to Luke, surprised. He said quietly, "That was a long time ago." The old man grinned. "Still worth remembering." Inside the diner, they sat near the window. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, recognized Luke immediately. "Coffee for you, Luke? And for your friend?" "Yes, ma'am," Luke said. Emma looked around. Everyone seemed to know him, but they spoke with respect, not curiosity. It was clear Luke was someone people trusted. She felt proud just sitting across from him, though she didn't quite know why. When the waitress walked away, Emma leaned forward. "You never told me you were some kind of local hero." Luke shook his head with a small smile. "I'm no hero, just a man who tries to do right when he can." She looked at him for a moment, then said softly, "That's rare these days." They finished their meal quietly. When they stepped back outside, the sky had cleared completely. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of grass and dust. Emma knew this might be their last moment together. She didn't want to leave yet. "Thank you, Luke," she said, holding her bag. "For everything." He looked at her carefully, his voice low. "You sure you're ready to go back?" She hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think I have to." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes we go back to find what's missing. Other times we go back to see it was never there." His words stayed with her. She wanted to say something more, but the lump in her throat stopped her. Just then, the diner's old radio played a slow country song. The sound of it carried across the dusty road. Luke looked out at the horizon and said quietly, "If you ever need a place to catch your breath again, the ranch is always there." Emma smiled faintly, blinking away a tear she didn't want him to see. "I'll remember that." Before leaving, she turned once more to look at him, the man who had appeared out of a storm, who spoke little but somehow said everything she needed to hear. Luke lifted his hat in a small gesture of respect. "Take care, Emma." "You too, Luke," she said softly. As she walked away, the afternoon light fell over the valley. The wind brushed through the grass, carrying the faint smell of rain and soil. Luke stood beside his horse, watching her go until she disappeared beyond the curve of the road. He didn't move for a while. Then he whispered quietly to himself, "Be gentle. It's too fast," repeating her words, realizing they meant more than fear of a horse. They meant life itself. How quickly it moved, how easily moments passed before a person knew their worth. He looked up at the open sky, then turned back toward his ranch. There was work to be done, fences to fix, animals to feed. But something had changed in him. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt alive, like it carried a new promise inside it. Back in town, Emma sat by her repaired car before driving off. She glanced once at the horizon and smiled. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of what came next. The world still moved fast, but now she knew there was still kindness out there, still people who moved at the pace of the heart instead of the clock. And somewhere in the wide, golden fields behind her, a cowboy was smiling too, carrying the memory of her laughter and the warmth she had unknowingly returned to his quiet world. The days passed quietly after Emma left for town. Luke went back to his usual routine, feeding the cattle, repairing fences, and checking the barn every morning. But something in his world had changed. The silence felt different now. It no longer carried the same weight it once did. Sometimes, while pouring his morning coffee, he'd find himself glancing toward the empty chair across the table. He didn't admit it out loud, but he missed her soft voice and the sound of her laughter echoing in his kitchen. The ranch dog, Rusty, seemed to notice the change too. He'd often sit by the porch looking down the dirt road as if waiting for someone. Luke would chuckle and say, "She's gone, boy. Don't wait up." But deep down he was waiting too. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the valley, Luke heard a car engine outside. He stepped onto the porch and froze when he saw who it was. Emma's small blue car rolled to a stop, kicking up a cloud of dust. When she stepped out, she waved shyly. "Hope I'm not intruding," she said with a nervous smile. Luke smiled faintly. "Never a bother. What brings you back?" She looked down, brushing hair from her face. "I had some time off work. Thought I'd check on my car, and maybe say hello." He nodded slowly, trying to hide how glad he felt. "The car's still fine. Just needed a new battery. Come on in. Rusty'll be happy to see you." The dog ran to greet her, tail wagging furiously. Emma laughed, bending to pet him. It felt as if no time had passed at all. Inside, the house looked the same. Neat, quiet, filled with the smell of wood and coffee. She noticed a new photo on the table, a picture of the sunrise over the ranch. Luke had framed it. As they talked, Emma found herself glancing around again. There was comfort here, a kind of peace she hadn't felt anywhere else. "I miss this place," she said softly. "Everything in the city feels so fast, like I can't breathe there anymore." Luke nodded. "The land slows you down, whether you like it or not." They spent the afternoon working in the garden behind the barn. Luke taught her how to mend an old wooden fence and how to spot weather changes by watching the clouds. Every time she stumbled or struggled with a tool, he helped her with patient hands, never making her feel foolish. Their laughter mixed with the sounds of the wind and the rustling grass. When evening came, Luke invited her inside for dinner. She helped him cook, and together they shared a simple meal by the fire. The warmth between them was unspoken but clear. It wasn't romantic or rushed, it was gentle, like the slow rhythm of two hearts learning to trust again. After dinner, while Luke was outside checking on the horses, Emma wandered into the barn. The fading sunlight slipped through the wooden cracks, casting golden lines across the floor. She noticed an old workbench covered in tools and papers. Something caught her eye. A small wooden drawer slightly open. Out of curiosity, she pulled it wider and found a folded piece of paper inside, yellowed with age. It was a letter, written in neat handwriting. She didn't mean to pry, but when she saw the first line, her breath caught. "My dearest Sarah, it's been another year without you." Her heart tightened. It was a letter to his late wife. She hesitated, unsure if she should keep reading, but something made her continue. The words were full of quiet pain and love. "I still hear your laugh when the wind blows through the barn. I still set 2 cups at the table sometimes, even though I drink alone. Maybe someday I'll stop waiting for your voice in the wind." Emma felt tears forming in her eyes. The letter wasn't finished. The last line read, "If someone ever finds this, tell her I tried to keep my promise, to live even when it hurt." She folded the letter carefully and placed it back where she found it. When she turned around, Luke was standing at the barn door watching her. His expression was calm, but his eyes were heavy with memory. "You found it," he said softly. Emma froze. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to read," he shook his head gently. "It's all right. It's been sitting there for years. Maybe it was meant to be found." She stepped closer, her voice low. "You still love her, don't you?" Luke looked away, staring out toward the fields. "I always will," he said quietly. "But maybe love doesn't mean holding on forever. Maybe it just means remembering without letting it stop you from living." For a long moment they stood in silence, the golden light of sunset wrapping around them. Then Luke added softly, "You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, just in the way you care." Sarah had that same gentleness. Emma's throat tightened. She must have been very special. "She was," he said. "And so are you, Emma. You brought laughter back to this place." Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. "I didn't do anything." He looked at her kindly. "You showed up. Sometimes that's enough." They walked back to the house together. The air had turned cool and crickets had begun to sing. Luke lit the fire and the two sat quietly, each lost in thought. After a while, Emma said softly, "You know, when I read that letter, I didn't just feel your pain. I felt your strength. You didn't let the loss make you bitter." Luke smiled faintly. Sarah wouldn't have wanted that. She used to say that life's too short to live angry. Emma nodded. She was right. A peaceful silence filled the room again. Rusty stretched near the hearth, his tail thumping lazily. Luke reached for his coffee cup and looked at Emma. "You staying the night?" She hesitated, then nodded. "If that's all right." He chuckled softly. "You don't need to ask." That night, Emma lay in the same guest room she had stayed in during the storm. The wind outside was calm, whispering through the trees. She thought about Luke, about the letter, about the way grief could live quietly inside a person but still leave room for kindness. She understood now that real strength wasn't about hiding pain. It was about carrying it with grace. Downstairs, Luke sat by the fire, the unfinished letter in his hands. He read the last line again and smiled faintly. Then, for the first time in years, he picked up a pen and wrote a new sentence. "I think I'm finally learning to live again, Sarah. You'd like her. She makes the house feel warm." He folded the paper and placed it back in the drawer, not as an ending, but as a new chapter. When he looked out the window, he saw the moonlight spreading over the fields, soft and silver. He felt peace settle in his heart, the kind that comes only when old wounds begin to heal. Upstairs, Emma looked out her window too. The same moon shone over both of them. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she felt something strong and gentle between them. A bond built not on romance or promises, but on understanding. Two souls who had both been lost slowly finding their way home. And as the night deepened, both of them, in their separate rooms, smiled quietly, knowing that sometimes life gives second chances not in grand gestures, but in simple moments like a soft voice in a barn, a shared cup of coffee, or a letter found at the right time. The morning light spread slowly over the valley, touching the hills and the wooden fence with a golden glow. The air was cool and mist drifted above the wet grass. Inside the ranch house, Emma stood by the window with a cup of coffee in her hand. She looked peaceful, but her eyes carried a quiet sadness. She knew this would be her last morning here. The few days she had spent at Luke's ranch had changed her more than she expected. It wasn't just the calm or the beauty of the land. It was the man himself. His kindness, his silence, and the way he made her feel safe without ever needing to say much. Downstairs, Luke was already busy. She could hear the sound of his boots on the porch, the soft voice he used when talking to the horses, and the familiar bark of Rusty running behind him. Emma smiled faintly, knowing she would miss that sound. When she stepped outside, Luke was tightening a saddle strap on Dusty, his horse. He looked up and gave her a small nod. "Road's clear now. I can take you back to the highway." She nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Thank you," she said softly. He glanced at her and noticed the way she looked around, as if memorizing every tree and fence post. "You can always come back, you know," he said. She smiled. "I know. But it feels hard to leave anyway." Luke said nothing for a while. The sun was climbing higher, lighting the fields in shades of gold and green. He reached out his hand to help her onto the horse. When she placed her hand in his, it felt warm and sure. As they started to ride, the wind brushed against her face. The sound of hooves on the dirt road echoed through the quiet morning. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The land stretched wide and open around them, and the world felt slower, gentler. When the horse began to pick up speed, Emma held onto the saddle tightly. Her heart raced as she said with a small laugh, "Be gentle. It's too fast." Luke slowed the horse immediately and turned his head slightly, his voice soft. "Don't worry. I'll always be gentle." Something in the way he said it made her heart ache. The words weren't just about the horse. They carried something deeper, something she couldn't quite explain. They rode side by side for miles. Luke pointed out the trail where he had first found her that stormy night. It looked different now, bright, calm, and full of life. Emma couldn't believe how much could change in such a short time. She thought about how scared she had been that night and how, without knowing it, Luke had helped her find courage again. As they neared the crossroads where the ranch road met the main highway, Emma's smile began to fade. She didn't want the ride to end. The world beyond that point felt far away, colder somehow. Luke slowed the horse to a stop near a wooden fence. "This is where I turn back," he said quietly. Emma looked at the road ahead. "Feels strange to leave," she whispered. Luke nodded. "It always does when you found something good." There was silence for a moment. The wind moved softly through the tall grass. Emma turned to him and said, "You've given me more peace than I've had in years, Luke. I don't think you even realize how much you helped me." He met her eyes. "You helped me too, Emma." She looked surprised. "Me?" He nodded slowly. "After Sarah passed, I stopped talking much. Stopped laughing. Thought I'd learned to live with the quiet. But the truth is, I wasn't living. I was just waiting. Then you showed up out of nowhere, scared and lost, and somehow you brought life back into this place." Her eyes grew warm with emotion. "You're a good man, Luke. You deserve to find peace." He smiled gently. "Maybe I already did." Emma didn't know what to say. Her heart felt heavy, caught between gratitude and something deeper that she couldn't name. She wanted to hug him, but something in his calm, respectful way made her stay still. Instead, she reached out and touched his hand for a brief moment. "Thank you," she whispered. Luke looked at her hand, then at her face. "You'll do just fine out there," he said. "The world's big, but don't let it change your heart." She smiled through her tears. "I won't." He stepped back slightly, helping her down from the horse. The road stretched ahead, quiet and empty. The sound of the wind and the faint rustle of leaves filled the air. Emma stood there, holding her bag, unsure how to leave. "I don't like goodbyes," she said softly. Luke nodded. "Then don't say one. Just say, 'See you soon.'" She smiled. "See you soon, cowboy." He tipped his hat with that familiar calm look in his eyes. "See you soon, city girl." Emma started walking down the road, turning once to wave. Luke raised his hand, watching her until she disappeared beyond the curve. For a long time he stood there, the horse beside him, the morning sunlight bright against the horizon. He felt a strange mix of sadness and peace. He had said goodbye to many people in his life, but this one felt different. It didn't feel like an ending, it felt like something new beginning. He rode back slowly, taking the long way home through the open fields. As he passed the creek, he stopped for a moment and looked at the water glimmering in the sun. That was where he had first seen her, trapped and frightened. Now she was gone, stronger than before, and he felt proud of that. When he reached the ranch, Rusty ran to greet him, barking happily. Luke smiled, patting the dog's head. "She made it back, boy," he said. "She's going to be all right." That evening, the sun set over the valley in shades of red and orange. Luke sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, the same chair where he had sat alone for so many evenings before. But tonight it didn't feel lonely. He watched the horizon, thinking about the city lights far away where Emma would be driving now. He hoped she'd find what she was looking for, but a part of him believed she already had. Inside the house, the letter to Sarah still rested in the drawer. Luke didn't open it again. He didn't need to. Instead, he picked up a new sheet of paper and began to write another note, one that felt different this time. "Dear Sarah," he wrote, "I think you were right. Life doesn't end with loss. Sometimes it begins again in ways we don't expect. I met someone kind, a soul as gentle as the rain. Don't worry, I'm smiling again." He folded the paper and placed it beside the old letter. Then he blew out the lamp and stepped onto the porch one last time that night. The stars stretched wide across the sky, and the wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers. Luke closed his eyes and whispered, "Be gentle. It's too fast," repeating Emma's words with a quiet smile. Somewhere miles away, Emma sat by her window in a small apartment watching the city lights flicker. Her mind drifted to the wide fields, the golden sunsets, and the man who had taught her what gentleness truly meant. She whispered the same words to herself, smiling through the tears that touched her cheeks. Two souls far apart but forever connected by kindness looked at the same night sky, each feeling a peace they had never known before. And though they walked different roads, both carried the same truth in their hearts, that sometimes love doesn't have to be spoken to be real, and gentleness can heal what the strongest storms could never touch. And so, under the soft whisper of the wind, the cowboy and the girl both found what they had been searching for, not in each other's arms, but in the quiet understanding that some souls meet only to remind one another how beautiful it is to be alive.